Welcome to the Manufacturing Matters podcast with the Council of Industry. Join us as we bring you inspiring stories, interviews, and insights from across the Hudson Valley that will revolutionize the way you think about manufacturing. This podcast is proudly sponsored by PKF O'Connor Davies, a leading accounting and advisory firm dedicated to helping businesses thrive in the manufacturing sector. With their industry knowledge and strategic guidance, PKF O'Connor Davies ensures that manufacturers have the financial insights and support they need to achieve success.
Tom Sipos, host of Hudson Valley Focus Live and founder of Hudson Valley Focus. Welcome to the Council of Industry podcast.
Thank you very much, Harold King. It's always great to converse and talk about manufacturing here in the Hudson Valley with you.
It certainly is, and I feel a little bit of a role reversal. I'm usually being interviewed by you, so the interviewer is going to be the interviewee for this show. Let's go way back and let's talk about Hudson Valley Focus first and how it evolved into the radio show that it is today.
Sure. First of all, let's go back even a little bit further.
In the Wayback Machine, okay.
In the Wayback Machine, with my involvement when my family and I owned Sipos Insurance, which was a property casualty business here in the Hudson Valley for 57 years. Many of my insurance clients were, in fact, in the manufacturing business. And of course, you and other listeners well know that we went through a heck of a change here, late 1980s, early 1990s. And I got deeply involved at that point in time with economic development, with workforce development, and really trying to merge the roles of education. And you and I have worked extensively over the better part of 3 decades now, and really looking forward at the demographics of the aging workforce, the conversations we had all those years ago, and the fact that we really needed to do something about it. We couldn't sit and wait and lose the institutional knowledge that was built up in these companies. I mean, many of these companies, as I say, were my clients. One was a open die hammer forging operation, 5 generations. Gosh, if that is lost, it's almost gone forever.
You mentioned that like late 80s, early 90s. I mean, the crisis in question for Dutchess in particular was the IBM downsizing and the transition there. And you worked very methodically and intentionally to fix that. Maybe talk a little bit about that era of time there and some of the initiatives you struck up.
In 1992, I was in charge of long-range planning for Poughkeepsie area, what was then the Poughkeepsie Area Chamber of Commerce. And part of that was to do an assessment of our business environment here in the region. We had a great committee, and really, now this is one, IBM had already been having some attrition and layoffs, but they had really not done the massive downsizing yet. But in our conversations in our group, we said, what if? What if? And we were very proactive, and this is in 1992, in saying, let's put something together, which we wound up calling a strategic direction conference that we kicked off in March of 1993, brought together community leaders, business leaders, economic developers, educators, and really talked about how do we diversify the economy. And what was absolutely, I guess, fortunate, you would say, it was 4 days after that conference, there was a big headline that IBM was actually going to have their first ever layoffs. And we hit the ground running. I went on to found something called the Dutchess Alliance for Human Needs. The EDCs were focused on renting vacant space, bringing in jobs. And I had raised a simple question: how will we care for the people in the community who have lost their jobs? And it was widespread. It was, you and I have spent years talking about the ecosystem of the economy. So for every direct job lost, we lost 2 or 3 other jobs out in the community, to the point that most service businesses, including my own family insurance business, I lost 40% of my business over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
and had to in fact rebuild. But that was not unique. That
Right.
was the same with everyone. So we're talking 1993. By 1995, Business Week had a cover story entitled "The Town IBM Left Behind," and they marveled at how quickly we had rebounded. But Harold, there were lots of people involved. I think this goes back to
Right.
when you and I first met.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a, what would you call it, a full court press of everything that we had to look at the economy, to look at the people, and try to take every initiative. We were one of the earliest adopters of agritourism,
Hmm.
and to bring new people to the area, bring in outside individuals. And I will add at this point, the religious community, believe it or not, was one that really stepped up and brought together their voices through their congregations. Nobody had ever done this before in terms of merging economic development, human services, educators, the religious community to say, let's all, this was literally part of the conversation, just like the rowing shell, let's get together and let's pull on those oars in unison.
Mm.
And that's what we did.
Yeah. You see the benefits of that now, today, 30
Yeah.
plus years later, in the diversified economy, the thriving real estate market, the thriving small business community that is in Dutchess, and the greater Hudson Valley region around there as well. But I don't think you can overstate the potential for catastrophe that those layoffs were. I mean, you probably
Yes.
know the numbers a little better than I do, but you're talking, tens of thousands of people being
Yes.
laid off with a workforce that was probably, 60,000. It was a substantial impact.
There was one significant event that stuck in my mind. We were early adopters of insurance agency automation, and that went all the way back to the early 1981. That automation system ran on a Wang computer system. So when Wang computers went belly up in Lowell, Massachusetts, I was well aware of it. I was also aware of the fallout that happened in those surrounding communities, the I 128 corridor around Boston, the increases in domestic violence, of all of the residual things that happened. In my background in risk management said, well, if we know these things, how do we step in and work as a community to intercept that and help people over this crisis? Fear and anxiety cripples a community. And we did a heck of a job of bringing that together. And by the mid 1990s, I was chairing Dutchess County's Workforce Investment Board. Well, the old Private Industry Council.
Right.
Later on, it morphed into the WIB system, Workforce Investment Boards. So again, we tried to bring people together. We tore down the silos, something you and I have worked on for years and years and years, and to get people to share their information, share their knowledge, basically people helping people grow the community.
So you're in the insurance business, you've got your community hat on, you're doing all that work. And at what point did you get out of the insurance game? When was that?
We actually sold the business in early 2007. My brother left the business and I stayed on until 2009. And at that point in time, it was time for me to just get out completely.
Okay.
And I was involved with the Hudson Valley Focus as a regional economic development entity and building on that, working with other economic development partners. And I actually still had just a little weekend radio show that started all the way back in 1995 when we were trying to let the community know what was happening with economic development. So I got out of the insurance business in 2009. In 2012, I was asked if I would bring back live community talk radio, Monday through Friday, 6 to 9 a.m., for the sense of building a sense of community.
Mm.
And, here we are all of these years later. I think did it very, very successfully, had a platform for 12 years. And as you know, right now, launching and expanding Hudson Valley Focus Live on an even bigger platform up and down Hudson Valley on something called the Beacon, from Peekskill, Beacon, Newburgh, up through Kingston, Saugerties. And that pretty much mirrors the territory, I believe, of the Council of Industry.
Yeah, it does sound like the perfect overlap for that. So talk about the show. I mean, Hudson Valley Focus Live, obviously you've said it to build a sense of community. I think you've done a great job of bringing folks in, local not-for-profits and elected officials, but you have a connection with the national and global community. It is all interconnected. So you talk a little bit about the priorities of the show and what you talk about.
Sure. What I try to do is, whether we're talking about something that is local, state, national, international, is how does it relate and how does it impact the lives of the people right here in the Hudson Valley? And of course, the education has always been a big factor in the communications. And I've always long been a champion of our local schools, our trades, industrial arts programs, our BOCES, or CTI, career and technical centers. And of course, for 14 years, served with you on the board over at advisory board at SUNY New Paltz School of Business. And as we grew that from really a business department to a fully accredited school of business, the same as a Harvard or a Wharton School of Business, something that I think a lot of folks do not realize that's right here in our own community. But again, interacting with the Manufacturing Day broadcast that you and I have hosted now, the one that we did in October of 2024 was our 11th Manufacturing Day broadcast, way ahead of the curve on what we were doing.
Ahead of the curve, probably because of your work in that economic development space, the Private Industry Council. You have always been ahead of the curve in recognizing whatever you call it, the skills gap, the demographic shift, the crisis in the trades. You have been an advocate and indeed a manufacturing champion because of your work in this area to spread the word and to help not just spread the word about the need, but to help build the training infrastructure that is required to actually train people into the trades.
And that just amazes to me how we've gotten in this situation as a nation. Going back many years ago, one of my on-air interviews that I did was an author of a book called FDR and the Arsenal of Democracy. If you know anything about the history of this nation, about how America mobilized, and it was our manufacturing might that allowed us to really help propel the world forward. And the fact that this is still a dangerous world that we live in, and always maintaining the self-sufficiency here. We certainly saw this throughout all of COVID when there were supply chains broken. How did we ever let our pharmaceutical industry move so much of its manufacturing offshore? And getting that back and building it up and making sure that we have this for the future, because you've educated me better than anyone about, for every dollar of manufacturing employment, there's perhaps $3 or $4 of economic multiplier within the communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that multiplier is huge and it is important. But, we always appreciate your platform for talking about this because we know it's more than just economic stability and growth and prosperity. It is, you mentioned pharmaceuticals, it's health and wellness security. It is national security. It is defense. You said FDR on the arsenal of democracy, Harry Hopkins is the guy that kind of was able to mobilize America's industrial base to win World War II, almost like turning on a light switch. It's very, foundational and very fundamental for our really security on multiple levels.
It really is. And of course, as we look forward from here, I've devoted huge portions of my radio show time over the last 12 years talking about health and well-being of Americans. And there's a twice monthly segment with a registered dietitian, with other healthcare providers, And of course, I would like folks to especially know that you and sometimes you and Johnny and Hanson have a twice monthly program with respect to what's happening in manufacturing. And
Right.
generally in the past, we've done this on the second and third Tuesdays of the month. I
Yeah.
would hope that we will continue to do that because it is amazing to me. This came up just very recently. I read some of the comments on social media where an individual posted that, oh, the tariffs, well, they won't matter, or this is going to be a problem because we don't make stuff in America anymore. Harold and the other listeners, that is still a huge public perception,
It
not
is.
recognizing how strong and how valuable and unnecessary our American manufacturing is.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, you've been a great voice for that. And hopefully we'll continue to be so. And we certainly plan to keep our dates, our second
Sure.
and third Thursday dates. We
Well,
certainly
let me
plan to do
jump in for 1 second because it occurred to me when we're talking about this. One of the other segments that I pay a lot of attention to on the radio show. I mean, sure, some of it's political, it's economics, it's education. I'm an avid environmentalist, but not a rabid environmentalist, and that is the entire field of energy.
Mm.
That is something that I devote a lot of time, a lot of effort to, of understanding where we are in terms of what we need for that base load of electric production, rebuilding the nation's grid. I mean, I've spoken about this for at least 20 years. And the fact that we really, if we're going to grow industry, you and I have spoken lots of times about the need for pure power. You don't build these high-tech systems with variable power supplies. I travel back and forth across the country. I go through areas out in Indiana, Iowa, with thousands of wind turbines, and I watch them standing idle literally when it's 10 below zero, and people need power. And that got me to really investigating further how all of this comes together. Setting public policy and really working with our legislators at both the state and federal level so that they have an understanding of what's doable, what the science really says about this is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I mean, energy is as fundamental to manufacturing as workforce. It's pretty much there, and you can certainly draw the parallels. We're barely touching on some of this, but we kind of picked you up where you started in the insurance business. But a lot of what you bring to the radio show and to Hudson Valley Focus Live is a wide range of experiences. And what I think this is probably my best compliment to you is not only your experiences, but your enthusiasm and your passion for learning and your curiosity. So tell us maybe a little story. I know you've talked about a science project you did in school that maybe sparked you.
When I was 14 years old, I did, in fact, that would have taken me back to 1962.
Hmm.
I did, in fact, build a working hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. Do not ask me how I, found the plans or how I did it or how I sourced the materials in those days before the internet. Because the only thing I remember specifically, not
Getting
have
a
any
visit
idea.
from the FBI after you were done.
No, unfortunately, no, fortunately, I did not. But somehow I actually had to find pure silver mesh screening as one of the components that went into this. And how I located it out of somewhere in Boston is beyond me. Like I say, before the internet was ever around. And then the following year, I built a bimetallic thermocouple that produced electricity with no moving parts, with only the direct application of heat. And that I don't remember how I found out how to do that, but I do remember where I was able to go to get the components that I needed because I think they were members of the Council of Industry way back when was Fargo
Oh,
Manufacturing
yeah, sure.
in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
And I walked in as I guess, a 15-year-old kid and said, I need this and this and this. And the woman at the reception desk looked at me, had no idea what I was talking about, but she picked up the phone and called someone in the back, and this individual walked out and said, "How much do you need?" And
That
it
sounds
was
right.
very, very exotic wire that they had. And he was more than helpful, happy to help me do my science project. But
No,
that's who
that's
we
great.
are.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
the point being, I'm a little kid. I've never quite grown up. I mean, I did have an invitation from one of my listeners the other day with a big construction equipment company to go and play with their toys up there on,
Wow.
the big rock trucks and bulldozers and stuff. So I'm in my element when I do that.
Yeah.
So, which is why when you and I visit your manufacturing members, I absolutely love it to be out there and see what they're doing and see who the people are. And it just, I don't know. That's why I really want to keep talking about this so that other people can be excited about it as well.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that that passion is, if we can somehow bottle that and share it with today's workforce, I think that that is so important. You've had shared some life lessons with folks. I know one of them is that lifelong learning is important.
Yes.
But the other one that I've heard you speak about is kind of owning your career, treating yourself as your own
Oh,
entrepreneur, your own business that you need to develop and grow and foster.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that I actually haven't thought about and expressed in quite a while. But yes, I have to come back to that. Every person, when their feet hit the floor each morning, should view themselves as a self-employed entrepreneur, no matter what they're doing. And you go and do that, and you do the best you can do, and it just opens up the door to any number of opportunities, as well as energizing and mentally lifting to the person doing it.
Right. It's just the right attitude. I mean, if you go with that attitude, you are going to present your best self wherever you are, and that will open doors. And if that means it's, getting a paycheck in one place, it'll open the next door to maybe a bigger paycheck or maybe your own business as you move through.
Yes, yes. I mean, you said it a minute ago. The idea of lifelong learning is so critically important, and what goes along with that is the career pathways. And of course, uh, you've been deeply involved with the pathways academies that have evolved now over the last 10 years here in the Hudson Valley that we are absolutely so fortunate to have.
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. As you mentioned earlier, we've been working on this a long time, and sometimes you look at it and you feel frustrated that you haven't made much progress. And other times you can look back and you say, wow, we really have come a long way and made quite a bit of progress. I think of that with you. You mentioned the accreditation at the School of Business. That was a wild thought from Dean Salavidbar's eye, but some hard work and a lot of commitment got that taken care of.
And that's something that I look back on with a great sense of pride. I actually, was there with you 14 years on that board, 5 years. I actually chaired the board for 5 years through the accreditation process. Of course, we found out later on that I was there longer than the bylaws called for. But the fact is that we left behind an organizational culture that, having the leadership, having the ethics, the integrity, the organizational culture is really what it's all about. And that comes from the top down and permeates.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, we see that School of Business as an institution as really branching off now and doing work in entrepreneurship and green energy and private equity work and now also in economic development, as Dean Bacchus has now also been appointed to be a vice president of economic development for the college, which is
Mhm.
a great thing to work into the community. So there's lots of good stuff going
So
on.
what you were involved in these years ago, I know they recently went through a reaccreditation process that in just a couple of months ago, speaking to current student, the culture of ethics and integrity that now goes back 2 decades, she was very clear that it was embedded in everything that she is currently doing.
That's great. Yeah,
And,
that
and
is
that's
that's certainly something to be proud of. I know you were passionate about that when you're in that role as chair. Tom, in the few minutes that we have left, maybe we can talk about some of the other institutions, some of the other silos that were out there that are now working together.
We can actually start right on the campus of SUNY New Paltz, because when we go back, 20 years ago, the School of Business, the engineering, the arts, they largely were not interacting. And while we were there, I mean, it's one of the very first conversations that I had when Don Christian came in as the president back all those years ago. Of course, he's now since retired, was to work together to tear down those silos. And the school did a great job of it. But the internships through the School of Business, the School of Science and Engineering, working with some of your members, Sonartech comes to mind, with them hiring students from there in internship positions and then going on to full-time employment. That's where the beauty, and I've said this to you many times, and I mean this sincerely, the Council of Industry as a facilitator of these relationships over the last 20 and 25 years has absolutely been tremendous all the way around, because that's what you guys are. I mean, you're facilitators.
We appreciate that.
And to bring people together. We look at the work, go down to Pine Bush with the work at Pine Bush High School with Aaron Hopmeyer and Tim Maines. I was trying to think of his name earlier.
Yeah,
right?
Tim.
A superintendent who's now sadly passed away. They were 100% committed to bringing in outside businesses and having these conversations, unlike some of the other schools that, well, we do what we do and kept themselves isolated. That fortunately is now starting to change as well.
Yeah. Definitely, we feel that. Well, Tom Sipos, the founder of Hudson Valley Focus and host of Hudson Valley Focus Live, thank you very much for being on the Council of Industry podcast, and we look forward to speaking with you on the radio show soon.
Well, and I look forward to hopefully the spring of 2025 with the next Manufacturing Champions Breakfast broadcast.
That's right around the corner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Manufacturing Matters, brought to you by the Council of Industry and sponsored by PKF O'Connor Davies, accountants and advisors who understand the unique challenges and opportunities in the manufacturing sector. We hope you gained valuable insights and inspiration from today's discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.